Good evening, Saurabh, and good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me, and I
Yes,
also
sir.
hope you can see my screen.
Yes, sir, we
So,
can.
okay. So, without further ado, I think we should start and use our limited time as best as we can. So, the issue that we were discussing at QACA was that it is in India, it's actually mandatory for the top 1,000 companies to engage in some kind of ESG reporting and improve upon their performance year by year. The question that arose was that how do the next 1,000 companies, that is, say, if you will, starting from 1,001 to 2,000 companies, going by market capitalization, why should these companies be interested in ESG? We found strong reasons for that. And today we would like to share that line of thinking with you through this webinar. So what I'm going to do in this webinar is that initially I just bring you on the same page as we happen to be regarding our climate concerns. So the initial slides and the initial talk would be a bit about climate. And then from there, we will move into the regime for handling environment, social, and governance in India. And beyond that, then we'll get into the depth of this whole question that why should these companies that are in this range, 1,000 to 2,000, be interested in ESG? While we are focusing on this, it does not at all mean that this webinar does not have relevance to companies that do not fall within this bracket, or even if you're not a company, it still is relevant for you because we'll be talking a lot of things that come in from all walks of life, and it'll be interesting for you. Whatever you do, even if you're a doctor, it'll make a lot of sense to you. So let me just move on. On your screen, I'm sharing a map, not a map, but a graph of the average temperature in the globe over the past 2,000 years. Now these are anomalies. This is a concept that climate scientists use because there is a lot of variation between the temperature, say in New Delhi, where I'm sitting and speaking, and for somebody who at the moment would maybe in a place like Helsinki. But if there is something that is happening in terms of the whole globe heating up, then that heat would be felt in Delhi and that heat would be felt in Helsinki, in both places. So whether climate scientists use this concept of anomalies where they do not bother very much about what that Helsinki is, say, 10 or 15 degrees cooler than Delhi all the time. And at times it goes down to 30 degrees cooler. But they use this concept to make comparisons. So using this concept of anomalies, this graph has been reconstructed for the globe as a whole. And what you see is that we begin somewhere around where Jesus Christ was born, if there was such a person, and over the past 2,000 years. So the temperature of the globe is almost stable. And then you see a spurt, which I've marked and circled actually in a with red, and you see that spurt. That is the primary characteristic of modern climate change. It is called human-induced anthropogenic global warming. And global warming is the primary characteristic which defines a lot of other things about climate change in the world, and we'll be talking about other things. But to begin, let us just note that we humans have been doing something to the climate system through whatever we do, through our lives, through our activities, that is heating up the globe. And I'll get into that in the next slide, what exactly we're doing, which brings about this spurt. So just please keep this in mind that there is a spurt over the last 150, 200 years that is very, very distinct from the way the world's climate system in terms of its temperature was behaving over 2000 years. In case you are interested in going back, I certainly do have certain slides which I can share, but we'll do that in the Q&A if somebody's interested. Now, this is something to give you more perspective on the climate system. We have the atmosphere, which contains about 750 gigatons of carbon. Most of it is in the form of carbon dioxide. Some of it is in the form of methane. And then there are other things which contain carbon. Carbon in the atmosphere as part of carbon dioxide or methane is the main culprit responsible for heating up the globe. So what happens is every year, the atmosphere transfers about 100 gigatons of carbon to the land biosphere through all sorts of photosynthetic activities that happen. And we humans and all plants and animals living on the biosphere, land biosphere, transfer about an equal quantity of carbon to the atmosphere. So there's perfect balance over here. If you were to look at the exchange between the atmosphere and the ocean, you would notice that the climate scientists tend to divide the ocean into two parts: the deep ocean and the upper surface of the ocean, the top 100 meters. So there's an exchange between the atmosphere and the top 100 meters of the ocean surface, and the volume of exchange is about the same as happens between the atmosphere and the land biosphere. And an equal volume of carbon is transferred both ways from the top layer of the ocean to the deep oceans. So if you were to just look at this system, the way it is, it's in perfect balance. What we humans have been doing over the last 200 years or 250 years is that we have begun using oil, gas, and coal as fossil fuels for the industrial activities that we do, for the transportation that we engage in, for the air conditioning that we do, and for lots of other things. And these happen to be carbon atoms that have been stored up inside the earth, and they are now being dug out from the earth as coal, as gas, as oil, and they are being transferred to the atmosphere. Roughly at present, we each year are adding up about 10 gigatons of carbon to the atmosphere. So next year, this thing from 750 should be moving on to 760. But then there are feedback systems in the whole climate system, which prevent that from messing up things. But it's still adding up to the atmosphere, and whatever additional carbon that we are adding into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide or methane is what is causing global warming. I'll show you a short video just so that you can appreciate what's happening.
Make it together.
This is
And the
Alaska.
Sawyer Glacier is off our bow, just around the corner, out of view.
So that was a glacier breaking up in Alaska. This phenomena is called glacier calving, and it's something as old as the Earth. The problem today is not that glaciers are calving, but the problem is that they're calving too much. So whatever ice gets added up to a glacier during the winters, if that balances out whatever amount of ice is lost from a glacier in the summers, then there's no problem. But due to global warming, what is actually happening is that the ice that is getting added to these glaciers is less compared to the ice that is getting dissolved each summer. And the whole climate system is heating up. And it's something that's very physical. We will be and are being stressed in many ways. We live in India, most of us live in India, and it's a place that is, we're moving into the summer. And like last summer, there was a lot of heat stress. This summer is also going to come in with a lot of heat stress. There will be all sorts of disruptions when there is too much demand on power. There are power outages. There are, when conditions are hot and humid, there are sort of all sorts of diseases that spread. If the air quality is poor, then people have all sorts of respiratory problems. But something very interesting is that what scientists call extreme weather events. With the climate system becoming destabilized, you have more and more of these extreme weather events, which means that you can have a flash flood. Earlier, when the climate system was not so stressed, there were still floods, but the approach of the flood was gentle. It gave people opportunities to move out of a situation, retreat from the flood area, and take care of life. In fact, a lot of cultures lived close to rivers and they moved to and fro from the water because life was managed in that way. But these modern climate changes bring in extreme weather events. People colloquially talk कि भाई हमारे गांव में बादल फट गया. So that's extreme rainfall in a very short while happening. When the entire climate system gets disrupted the way it is happening, it has bad consequences for agriculture, which has implications for food insecurity. When there are shortages in the market for things that are not anticipated, you have a lot of price volatility happening. Because if there are such conditions and these conditions persist, you can have social strife. So there are multiple impacts of climate change. And I'll just show you one more short video and then move on to our topic. But just this.
Extremely heavy rains, landslides, and flash floods battered much of North India on July 9, unleashing widespread damage and misery in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Punjab, Haryana, and Delhi, leaving at least 13 dead. Manali National Highway remained blocked. The Himachal Pradesh government has said that schools and colleges will remain closed for next 2 days. Northern Railways said that it has cancelled 17 trains and diverted 12 others.
So that's an extreme weather event, the kind of thing that I was talking of. It happened 2 years back. This is July 2023. Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand. You and I are in for more of this stuff with what is happening to the world that we live in. Now, some context. Number one, Are governments worried about the situation? Yes, they are. Governments across the globe are definitely worried about the situation. They've been worried for a long time. The United Nations, with the beginning of this century, has been seriously talking about handling climate change, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came into existence in 1988. So we have roughly 30, 25 and 12, that makes it about 37, 38 years of active history of people, at least people who are knowledgeable about things, being worried about climate change, interested in handling climate change, working towards that. India has also been sending scientists to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a body of about 300 top-notch climate scientists in the world. Indian government has actually begun a process of instituting environment, social and governance reporting frameworks beginning in 2009. And they've developed, earlier it used to be BRR. In 2021, they introduced a new framework which was called BRSR, and it was mandatory. It became mandatory beginning in the year 23-24 for the top 1,000 listed companies in the stock exchange going by market capitalization. They have the degree in which the severity of the reporting and the complexity of the reporting has increased over time. But the same does not apply beyond those 1,000 companies. And this is what we're going to talk about, that since the next 1,000 companies are not under any compulsive obligation to invest or engage in ESG, why should they be interested? Before I just move on, let me just give you a short introduction to BRSR. As I talked, it began in 2021 and it became applicable from 23-24. It actually was something that the government instituted because there was all-round demand for such a thing. The framework is based on 9 ESG principles. I have listed some of them over here as part of the next bullet point. If you're interested, we can go into more of them. But there are aspects of each principle that are essential where reporting is mandatory. And there are aspects of each principle where reporting is voluntary. The good news is that there are a lot of companies that not only engage in mandatory reporting, but also engage in voluntary reporting, and they have very good reasons for doing that. It makes a lot of business sense to engage in voluntary reporting. I'll be touching on that in the later part of this discussion that we have today. The government introduced something called the BRSR core, which is a subset of the broader BRSR, and you have mandatorily required to report on 9 critical BRSR indicators. There are levels in which you are required to do things. There have been changes. I'm not talking about those changes, but I'm just to give you insight. The top 250 companies engaging in BRSR core reporting have to give some amount of reasonable assurance, whereas the others the remaining 750 can engage in limited assurance. What's the difference? In both cases, there's an audit. The limited audit takes care of what's written on the paper, and the auditor makes sure that there is no inconsistency in that. But the auditor is not expected, there are no calculation mistakes, there's no inconsistencies in any manner. And whatever was required is there in the report. But the auditor is not expected to go and make a physical check whether the information reported is true and make any critical checking on that. But if you're asked to do reasonable assurance, then it is an audit that is in a lot more depth. And say if you are a steel manufacturing company, then the auditor is expected to go near the furnace and measure or find out whether the emissions that are reported from the furnace are actually at the level at which they're stated to be. So this is more stringent, this is more strict. Okay, so with this overview, I'll move on to the things which define the situation very much. There are three contextual imperatives that we need to keep in the back of our mind if we are to understand what's going on and how we can strategize in that situation. Number one, obviously, is world politics. World politics beginning this year has taken a noticeable turn. The turn is that the government in the United States does not believe that climate change is actually happening. It denies the fact. And it is promoting the use of fossil fuels in a big way on one hand, and it is coming down on funding that was there for a lot of ESG activity. It is withdrawing many laws and many things. So the approach is basically drill, baby, drill. This has had a cascading effect through a large part of the world. The European Union, which earlier was demanding that roughly about 50,000 companies engage in ESG reporting, has climbed down on its requirements, and today it's asking only 7,000 to engage in strict ESG reporting. Europe has actually been the leader in terms of moving the world towards environment, social and governance compliance. So if Europe is retreating because of a change in the political situation in the world, we are in for a very different situation across the globe. But everything is not as certain in other parts of the globe as is happening in the United States. Number one, China should be expected to continue doing what it is in terms of its green marketing. Why? It has the edge. It is the leader in green marketing in the world, and it'll try and press home its advantage. Government policy in other countries is expected to imitate the European example, and there will be a lot less money coming into funding, international funding efforts to achieve a greener planet. The graph at the bottom is nothing. It was just two colors. The blue colors are for years that had democratic governments, and the red colors are for years where you have the Republicans in power. And you can see the difference in the approach to funding for green activity. Okay. Now this is something that this slide actually talks of something that is very different from conventional or information that keeps on flowing. People generally tend to think that when we were burning, we earlier used to get our energy by burning wood, and then when we shifted to coal, and then from the coal we shifted by and large to oil and natural gas, and therefore there will be a transition to renewables. Unfortunately, world history has not behaved that way. If you look at the data, what happens is that when a new energy source comes into existence, it just adds on to the previous one. The previous one doesn't disappear. Wood is still being burned for heating and for cooking in some parts of the world. I would still say that wood is actually the only source of energy whose level of use has gone down. And a good reason for that is probably not because of human dislike for wood anymore. The bigger reason is availability of wood. We've chopped down so many forests that there is very little wood available to be burnt. So wood prices have gone down, and wood as a material for construction or for seeking heat in many forms, the use of wood has gone down. But coal took quite a long time to actually replace wood. It took about 200 years before it could overtake wood as the main source of energy in the world. And people have been using. So this is what I'm talking of, the pileup. Then somewhere 150 years back, 170 years back, oil was added to the energy mix, but it could not overtake coal as the chief energy source till the 1960s. So till about half a century back, or slightly more than half a century back. Natural gas has in no way reduced the demand for coal and oil. So as human requirements for energy increase, what happens is a new energy source gets added to the pile. And this is probably, I can say that with a lot of confidence, that this is what is going to happen to renewable energy. So it's very difficult to envisage a situation in which renewable energy will replace fossil fuels by 2050 or 2070 as earnest efforts and good meaning people are trying to do. Renewable energy is expected to add to the price, add to the mix. What are the implications of this? The implications of this are that fossil fuels, that is natural gas, oil, coal, and to a minuscule extent, burning wood, all these things, all these non-renewable sources of energy are going to keep on increasing the carbon dioxide content and to a small extent the methane content in the atmosphere. They're going to keep on increasing the greenhouse gases. So we are in for a lot more global warming. Despite the best efforts that have happened so far, and I've talked earlier that the level of efforts is likely to come down because of disinterest of important governments in the world in this thing. So we are in for a planet that's going to be a lot more hot than it currently is. Now, putting those two things together, what kind of business foresight does this require of us? There are two scenarios. One, that the Securities and Exchange Board will actually extend BRSR beyond the top 1,000 companies, and therefore the next cohort, that is the next 1,000, 2,000 companies, that they are to be part of the net. Why shouldn't they be preparing for ESG today? That's scenario one. Scenario two is that let us conservatively presume that India also follows the United States example, and the BRSR net is not expanded beyond the existing 1,000 companies. In that situation, it still makes sense for the next cohort to engage in ESG activity. And I'm getting down to that right away. This is because of something that the lower part of this slide talks of. And that is that if we're heating up the planet and global warming is actually happening, then nature does not choose to listen to what governments are saying. It doesn't choose to listen to what human beings think about how they would like to produce and distribute stuff that they produce, or how they would like to engage in their service activities. It comes with its own consequences, and it's going to define almost everything in years to come. So the need for ESG cannot be wished away. It is there to stay with us, whether we have governments interested in promoting ESG activity, or we have governments that are disinclined to any promotion of any ESG activity, because nature itself is going to override whatever politics and whatever economic policy is being framed, and it will force human beings to engage in that kind of a thing. Okay. Now the question for businesses. Businesses cannot afford to be altruistic. So it has to make business sense for a business entity to engage in ESG activity. At the bottom of this slide, have listed 4 drivers which are going to propel interest in ESG activity in years to come. So the argument is that mid-caps should, at least in the medium term, be interested in ESG activity, because it's going to be something that's going to force them to change the way they do business today. Let's take the first one. There is a lot of interest among exporters to engage in ESG because their clients want them to report on ESG metrics. So if you are not reporting on ESG metrics, you cannot enter certain markets, and the size of those markets are growing. 1. Number 2, within the country, if the top 1,000 companies have to report on ESG activity, and they are now being asked to report on the activity of their upstream suppliers and their downstream customers, and these companies are going to force their suppliers and maybe also their customers in different ways to give in ESG data, then if you want to engage in business with these top companies, you actually have to have knowledge of ESG, and you have to position yourself that way. And this all is stepping out from a demand from the general public for products and services that are sensitive to the environment. So this is one driver. It's sheer economic interest that's going to propel a lot of ESG activity, because you will be supplying services and goods to companies that want that. Number 2, there is a sharp drop, and today there is tremendous scope for energy being climate friendly. In fact, the cost of solar energy has dropped so seriously and so severely over the past 40, 50 years, 30 years, that it has actually become the cheapest source of electricity in the world. And that's the International Energy Agency saying that. So there wouldn't be many who would want to dispute that. The graph that I'm showing you also says that it begins at 1977 and it goes on to 2020. And what earlier used to cost you about $76 per watt in 1977 is today available for 1/5 of a dollar. Third, we are in a position where carbon capture technologies will become a part of the market. There are three kind of carbon capture technologies. Direct air capture is the weakest among these because it actually at the moment, I mean, it involves a lot of energy, and if that energy has to come in from burning of fossil fuels, then it doesn't take much sense. So direct air capture is only being used in places where you would want to purify the air for other things as well. But carbon capture at source is something that is being deployed in industries, and you have flue gases coming out, and the efficiencies that have been achieved is that you can capture, say about you can capture about 20% of the carbon that is being emitted, and it becomes significant. It's becoming this thing is becoming economically viable today. Natural and hybrid approaches have always been viable, and they are. And there are a lot of people working on developing breeds of plant that can capture more and more carbon in shorter times. So we can expect carbon capture technologies to improve in years to come, and this will be another driver in the whole scenario. The last is the interest of governments. The Indian government is promoting carbon and trade in carbon credit certificates. The Reserve Bank of India has been interested and has given directives to banks to provide loans and provide proof that how they are helping the environment. So some of the banks have come forth with schemes which give you loans for at a cheaper rate, or slightly cheaper rate of interest. But if you have a big amount, then it amounts to significant savings. And there is also interest among investors in giving money to ESG compliant companies. Why? Because a lot of investors want to invest in a company that has a long-term future. And if it's an ESG compliant company, then they see it as growing in the European market, they see it as growing in other parts of the world, and they would rather invest in an ESG compliant company than in a non-ESG compliant company or a rogue company in their terminology. So you have an increase in people who are interested in giving funds to ESG companies. There is talk of and there are ways in which international capital interested in ESG is also being approached. So put all these four drivers together. What I'm trying to say is that we have entered a phase in world history where the earlier interests of ESG, basically from worries about what's going to happen to the world, from an altruistic desire to help the world, is now shifting onto a more economic basis. And the four drivers that I've talked about are economic drivers that are propelling the whole situation. Are we dealing with uncertainty? Yes, we are. As mid-caps, you may be required and obligated to report on ESG tomorrow. You may not be obligated. Nobody knows. The situation is very fluid. In both scenarios, it is still wise to be prepared for ESG reporting. And I've listed some of the things that you could do in order to be ready for ESG reporting. So now I'm opening it up to the question and the discussion or whatever your thoughts are on the whole thing. And please.
There's one in the chat from Mr. Akhil. Can you share some good ESG initiatives which we can implement? Maybe, sir, you can unmute also. You can just inform about your background or something so that sir can help you better.
The ESG initiatives that are there's all kinds of frameworks which help you monitor ESG. For example, you have this greenhouse gases protocol, which asks companies to report on their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 emissions would be emissions that are things that a company does on its premises or it controls in a very direct manner. Scope 2 emissions would be emissions from the energy that a company uses. So if a company is using electricity and that electricity is coming from a grid where 75% of the energy is from a thermal plant and say 20% is from a hydroelectric plant and then 5% is from renewable sources of energy. So for every 100 watts that the company consumes, 75 watts of electricity, which comes from burning coal. So that needs to be accounted as part of scope 2. Scope 3 is something which the government is now pressing companies because say if you're a garment industry, all you're doing is, I mean, not all, but the main work that you're doing is that you are receiving cloth, you're cutting it into pieces of different sizes, you are stitching it, and then you're packing it and selling it. So in this case, the energy requirements and the emissions are low if you were talk of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. But the production of the cloth itself consumes a lot of substances that are harmful for the environment, the dyes that are used over there, the washing that happens out there, the weaving that happens. So the scope 3 emissions for such an industry would be very high. So most of these protocols that you have are protocols where you are expected to take care of these things. And the world actually doesn't have a single framework for this. Different companies, according to their requirements, have developed different kinds of things for companies to do that. The government of India has brought in this business responsibility and sustainability reporting framework for the work that needs to be done. This is one. What is this? This is a way of measuring the whole thing. Now there are initiatives to take care of the emissions. So I did show you a slide which talks of things like carbon capture at source, direct air capture, natural hybrid things. But I would want to take you to another place. Say let's talk of two things. Let's talk of a tree. A tree or a plant captures carbon dioxide from the air. It grows using that carbon dioxide, which it converts into glucose and all kinds of other organic molecules. And then if you use that plant to make a biofuel, and you drive your car using that biofuel, you are not actually increasing the carbon content of the atmosphere because you're just giving back to the atmosphere the same amount of carbon that was sequestered by the plant. So if biofuels are one solution where you tend to preserve the whole thing, then there are other kinds of fuels that are coming in. For example, hydrogen is a fuel where there is no emission of carbon dioxide. It's just you have these hydrogen fuel cells where hydrogen that has been captured in a cylinder is mixed up with oxygen and you get energy because it's a exothermic reaction. You get energy And the only output, ideally, from a vehicle or an engine that uses hydrogen as a fuel is water. So you have these kinds of things where you can use such fuels and move on to things. There are initiatives, as I talked of, where companies are coming out with products and systems which you can buy or you can rent out, which capture greenhouse gases at the source in the factory itself, at the exit point of the flue gases. So there are many such things that are happening. So I hope that answers what you wanted to know. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, Akhil sir, any further input you need? You can just please unmute and you can ask further. Okay, thank you, Akhil sir. There's another question, sir, from Mr. Majid. He's asking, can you speak about the impact of energy management and data management on ESG?
Impact of energy management and data management and ESG is a very positive impact. Because if you are concerned about managing energy and you're collecting data in order to manage energy better, then that's what all ESG is about. Because that's what an ESG professional does or helps you do. The ESG professionals say, I was talking of the BRSR framework. The government says collect data. Why? Because it wants you to manage your energy better. It wants you to improve year on year your reduce the greenhouse gases associated with a unit of energy that you're using. So this is something very fundamental, and this is what ESG is all about. It's about that data management and energy management. And as we have, to add to that, as we have improved our abilities to gather data in a more authentic way, and as we have developed technologies to manage energy better or improve the energy mix, we are actually taking steps forward in ESG. If the kind of political things that the bad political things that I talked of that have started happening with the beginning of this year were not happening, and the world moved on, in the next 10 years, we could actually probably have a standard ESG management system across the entire world, where you could make comparisons between any two geographies producing the same stuff. And you could also probably be in a position to make cross industry comparisons. There's actually an effort underway to create such a system, but I think now it's fallen into bad times, and we may not expect that happening very soon. But as I said, nature will press us once again into this direction. Yeah, thanks, Majid, for an important one. Thank you.
Okay, so there's, I hope this answers your question, Mr. Majid. But there's another question from Mr. Surya Narayan. Is ESG compliance mandatory for all industry types? What are all the types?
Yes.
All the immediate steps and action to take ESG compliance?
If you happen to be among the top 1,000 companies in the world, it's mandatory for all industry types. The SEBI doesn't care whether you're a government entity or you're a private entity. SEBI doesn't care whether you're producing steel or you are just writing software. It's mandatory across the board.
Okay, so there's another question further to this. What are all the immediate steps or actions to take ESG compliance?
Report on BRSR.
Hi, sir. This is Rajaram from Mezhak, India. I have one question. Actually, if you talked about the 100 listed companies that are mandated by SEBI to disclose ESG. But what about those companies which are like, for example, which are larger MNCs, but those are not listed in India, but which has a significant amount of the business in India? Which standard or which law is by they mandated through for ESG or ESG like compliances?
So the only way that they would be doing their business would be by tying up with a business entity in India. And the business entity in India would be required to report on what they're doing. That's one way, or they would have to be registered with the government of India. They cannot do business without being on a government monitored system in any way. So they are part of the net. The good news about that is that many of these companies that are participating in these things are actually companies that have stronger ESG commitments than those that are required by the government of India. For example, Microsoft has a commitment, a global commitment, that it is moving away and it is going to become a net zero company in terms of its energy consumption, which means that whatever energy Microsoft is going to use in any way is going to come from renewables. And if Microsoft people are traveling in aeroplanes and using petrol that way, or Microsoft people are driving gasoline cars, then Microsoft is making efforts to plant an equivalent number of trees or engage in some other kind of carbon capture to offset that. And so it's going to become a net zero company in all senses. And Microsoft is a company that's doing business in India. So what I'm trying to say is that there are companies that are under the purview of the government of India in the first place. And secondly, the good news is that most of these companies that are actually there, they have strong ESG commitments themselves.
Okay, so thank you.
Yes, yes. Can I move on to the last question in this list?
Yeah, there are two questions. So
yes,
one is there
yes.
in the Q&A tab as well. So we'll take that first. Are there any financial incentives available from Government of India to pursue ESG initiatives?
Yes, there are. The financial incentives are that the government of India has conferred with the Reserve Bank of India, and Reserve Bank of India has asked each bank operating in the country to engage in ESG activity. One way that many banks are coming forth is that if you put forth your credentials for ESG activity, then you are entitled to cheaper loans. And I think that is the strongest incentive out there for doing things, that you get money at cheaper rates of interest. And there could be banks which are coming with other kinds of softer terms.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir. We have another question. We are chemical manufacturing private limited company. Is it mandatory to report ESG, and if yes, any evidence?
So if you are among the top 1,000 companies, you are required to report. If you're not, in terms of the volume of the capital that you have, then you are not required to report in a direct way. But as I said, you would still have a strong interest in reporting on ESG, because people who buy your chemicals would be people who are required to report on ESG. And since they are being compelled by the government of India to report on their upstream suppliers. So the rule is that if the company among its total purchases is has a seller that is selling more than 2% of its stuff, then that needs to be accounted for. The second rule that applies to the company is that it has to report at least 75% of its purchases and sales and take those into scope 3. So from a chemical manufacturing company perspective, since you would be selling stuff to companies that have to follow these two rules, the company itself, your purchaser of chemicals from you would be asking you to do that as time moves on. So it's advisable to be prepared for what's going to happen.
Okay, fine. Thanks. So any more question, participants? We are already 6 minutes overdue, but still, if you have any questions, we can discuss it now, or else we'll wrap up the session.
Sir, I have one question. Again, Rajaram here.
Yes.
Sir, just talked about the one example of garment industry that which as compared to scope 1 and scope 3, scope 2, scope 3 is more, and yeah, there is the many example like this. If industry is assembly and purchasing the parts from the sources. My question is specific question is that what the BRSR has to say on the scope 3, and is there any special mandate or any special principle to address wherein scope 3 emission is larger than scope 1 and scope 2?
So I think I put it there in a slide somewhere. Yes. The top 250 companies have to mandatorily report beginning 26-27 with this scope 1 and scope 2, and also scope 3 is now applicable to the top 150 companies. So it's a beginning. It's a beginning that's been made in a good direction, and it's expected to increase. I probably have not listed it somewhere, but yeah, I may have a slide somewhere down. Okay, it's going to be difficult for me to find the exact slide that I had, but I just didn't keep it here just to keep the discussion short. There's a slide, and I'll share the information with you if you were to write to us, and I'll provide that information in detail.
Okay. Yes, somebody was asking something. Okay. Fine, then there are no further questions. I think so we can wrap up the session, right, sir?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would like to thank everybody for the participation and for the questions as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all participants for your active participation and engagement throughout this webinar. So apart from this, we have a few training sessions also planned on BRSR, which is a 2-day module wherein we have an in-depth discussion regarding this compliances. And apart from that, we have courses on ESG implementation, GHG for ISO 14064. So if you need any further information, you can write to us. We'll be sharing you the details over the email as well. So we hope you found this session informative and valuable. We appreciate you for the time you have taken to attend this session today. And before we close, I would like to thank our speaker, Hardeep sir, for sharing his expertise with us. So thank you all. So in case you have any further questions, need any clarification on any topic, please write back to us. You have my email ID and you have my contact number in my email. So thank you once again, and we look forward to have you join in our future sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh.